What's going on, guys? I'm IcyRhythms, and this is my review for Alien Isolation.
Fuck.
I wouldn't have ever thought that Creative Assembly would be able to create something as special as Alien Isolation. This game has amazing visuals because their artists are quite obviously fans of the films. The art style and atmosphere in this game resembles so much of those original films, but there is fan service all over to be had in this game. For a game that released over 5 years ago, it's still a game I believe to be very pretty in the visuals department, but most won't be blown away with the texture work or anything that sits up there with stuff like Metro Exodus or the Crisis 3s of the world, but the name of the game here is fan service and attention to detail. Detail that represents the Alien universe and represents it well. The first moment you spend playing as Amanda in the game will have you screaming out, "I really feel like I'm in one of the original Alien films." For what they were going for, and this being a game that's supposed to scare you with a lot of survival horror elements, it's about as perfect looking as it gets. Character models aren't great. That's probably one knock on the visuals. The synthetics or the droids and Samuels look pretty good, but other than that, character models are the graphics' biggest weakness. Playing this on PC at well over 100 FPS on average, and sometimes on average well over 200 FPS, is amazing. This game was well optimized at launch, and then you didn't need one, and you still don't need an amazing rig now to experience this game in all its glory. Alien Isolation arguably has the best fire effects of the generation. As simple as something like that is, I think Creative needed to get the fire right, given that fire is a big part of this universe and makes sense given the source material. Anyone that tries telling you that this game doesn't look amazing, especially if they're a big fan of the films and doesn't make them feel a certain type of way, they're either lying to you or they're lying to themselves. Alien Isolation, after all this time, still looks like a pretty damn good game to me. Creative Assembly have made a very good, a very solid survival horror game here. It is one of the best examples of what I feel a survival horror game should be in so many ways. This is what you would call, many will refer to as, a very linear game. It is a linear game. It's a hallway or corridor game with a lot of moving parts. There is no way to create this type of tension and this type of horror in like a Rockstar or Ubisoft size open world. I just can't see something like that working out. Item management is a big part of the gameplay, of course. Wasting what little you have at the worst possible time when you'll likely need it later is a big mistake. Pro tip from someone with around 120, 125 hours in this game: keep the revolver ammo stocked, and more importantly, don't waste flamethrower fuel. You are going to need the flamethrower in the later stages of this game. You're going to need the flamethrower, you're going to need the fuel for the flamethrower, especially if it's your first or second playthrough. I've played this game tons of times, so I feel like with every playthrough, I actually use Molotovs and the flamethrower less and less, but that's just me. Looting bodies and gathering materials in boxes and crates is how you'll find what you need for your weapons and other upgrades. Alien Isolation relies less on strategies where you can run around enemies to conserve ammo and other items, and more on stealth elements. I don't mind stealth elements, especially in this game, because you need to hide. You need to hide in Alien Isolation, so stealth elements aren't the biggest deal, but so many games today rely on stealth elements when developers run out of other ideas. Speaking of running and hiding, another pro tip I'd give is to not run in this game. There's a few sections of the game where you can run around all you want, but know your surroundings. If you hear the xenomorph moving around in the vents, don't run. Not only is the AI so good that the xenomorph will pop up nearby, oftentimes it'll know exactly where you are and run right to that location. The xenomorph isn't the only thing you'll be running and hiding from in Alien Isolation. Humans are often hostile and will gun you down on sight. They're just trying to survive, so it's only natural they don't trust many people and want to take whatever you have, your supplies. The synthetics or the droids are arguably your biggest problem in the game. You'll see more of them in the more important areas of the game than just about anything else. The xenomorph also ignores droids, ignores them as a threat or as a worry of any kind, so you'll need to think twice depending on where you're at and what you're doing before unloading on one of the working Joes. Unlike the xenomorph, the working Joes can be killed and taken out of the equation. There are several ways you can do this. I believe 3 or 4 shots from the revolver do the trick, 1 shotgun blast to the face, or a crazy amount of fire damage. Depending on where you're at in the game, it's pretty amazing how much attention to detail was put into it, because if you light a working Joe on fire, sometimes they may mention that they can withstand a ridiculous amount of heat. As they're walking toward you on fire, I mean, there's just no emotion. They're talking to you as they would even if they weren't on fire. It's incredible.
Is someone there? Come with me, please. Oh, strange. You really shouldn't be that way. Sphere of fire. That would be responsible. I am meant to withstand temperatures of up to 1 feet Kelvin. That isn't authorized in this facility.
The stun baton also works on the working Joes as well as the human NPCs, but far more effective on humans. Stun is exactly what it does to the droids, and it doesn't last long. Trust me on that. If you choose to stun a human enemy, he or she will fall immediately to the ground. I've never stood around long enough to see if they wake up from that, or I have no idea. You can forget about it with the alien. The stun baton does absolutely jack to the xenomorph. Don't waste revolver bullets either. Much like the films, a lot of your average weaponry has little to no effect on the xenomorph. They fear fire, and that's it. You can stun them, you can distract them in many ways, but you won't be able to kill them. I like those little touches in a game like this because that's how the movies work for the most part. Now, in Alien 3, they were able to blow it up due to an unfortunate set of circumstances, but that's for a completely different video. The xenomorph is truly the perfect organism. Anytime this thing is on screen, your entire way of playing and move around the Sevastopol station changes. You slow way down. You know that you can no longer run around and just be completely mindless about what you're doing. You'll spend a good amount of time in lockers and ducking behind furniture or anything else that you can find. It's serious business. This thing isn't messing around. If you think you can just fire off shots at humans and droids anytime you want, you're sadly mistaken. It's going to come running, and depending on where you're at with the flamer fuel or just your general location in the game at that time, well, you have my sympathies. Human NPCs can very much be killed by yourself in many different ways. The droids and, of course, the xenomorph. But bringing that into an already complicated situation by firing shots off or running around or them running around, the game is almost begging you to make these sort of mistakes. Molotovs are one of your best friends. They're going to work on the Xenomorph, I'd say 80 to 90% of the time. The flamethrower is a different story. Your first 6 to 10 times you spend lighting it up, it's probably going to run away immediately. The Xenomorph will reach a point where it's a lot less intimidated and you'll be forced to use even more fuel if you want it to go away. In those situations, I would recommend small, controlled bursts. You don't want to hold the trigger down on the flamethrower. That fuel burns super, super quick, and there isn't a lot of it to go around. Early in the game, you'll get things like the maintenance jack or the security access tuner, also known as a hack tool. You'll be using these a lot, especially the hack tool, because it's so vital in different areas of the game for opening doors and accessing specific terminals. Amanda also gains access to things like the gas torch for some of those areas that can't be opened up with the maintenance jack or the hack tool, and she herself can actually turn off security cameras in areas with toxic gas. Everything that you have in this game has a purpose, but for me, I used things like flares and flashbangs the least. They weren't really my friends. I didn't really find them useful in most situations, and I got through the game many times fine without them. I'd use something like the flashbang when I didn't have a noisemaker or the parts to make a noisemaker. The flashbang itself makes a lot of noise, so if you throw it into a group of human NPCs, the alien will be distracted for a decent amount of time as you hack, use your torch, or if you just want to escape the area. In my opinion, Alien Isolation's gameplay is everything a survival horror game should be in today's climate. You have limited resources, the expected and not so expected jump scares, the perfect creature for science fiction, whether it's a game or film, all the attention to detail made possible based on the source material. Alien Isolation also has you returning to familiar areas in the game early and often. I guess on one hand, you become very familiar with an area hours earlier and you know your way around for the most part. On the other hand, I get it. Some players like total and complete progression where you're constantly doing something new, you're constantly moving forward, discovering new areas and locations. I get that. I do. It's not a knock for me. It may be a knock for you. Creative Assembly, if anything else, if you disagree with everything else, definitely should be praised for their work on the artificial intelligence in this game. It's not perfect, it's far from perfect, but it's very solid. I believe the way it works is that there are two brains for the Xenomorph, one that always knows where you're at, and the other one that feels more organic based on how well you're playing. That's probably why it always seems really close by as you progress through the game. I play Alien Isolation once or twice a year since it released in 2014. The gameplay for me is too good. I still see things I didn't see before with every playthrough, and it somehow manages to make my heart skip a beat even in 2020.
Identify yourself.
Ripley, from the Torrens.
I don't have time for this.
If the story in Alien Isolation was a movie, I'd watch it. I really think it's that good. For a survival horror game, I think it's that good, and I think it's pretty well written for the most part. I think given the source material, you would surely have to cut some corners to make a 2.5-hour movie versus a 15 to 20, 25-hour game, but I think it could work. In Alien Isolation, you are Amanda Ripley, daughter to, of course, none other than Ellen Ripley from the films. Early on, in one of the first cutscenes, Amanda is told if she comes aboard the Torrens and travels to Sevastopol, she may be able to obtain information on her mother. Based on what we know with the character in the films, Ellen would have done the same thing for her daughter Amanda. A droid by the name of Samuels, from the company no doubt, convinces her that it's in her best interest to make this trip and discover what happened to her mother. I know some fans of the films will consider this game a little too straightforward and probably see the experience coming from a mile away. But for me, I love that about it. I think what it does very well, and for the most part remains faithful to the earlier films. You even hear similar lines from the first two films in the story, whether it's in cutscenes or even something in the audio logs.
Quickly as possible, but I wanted to make sure you didn't do anything rash. I'm talking about catching the specimen without killing it. If we played smart, we could be set up for life. I have the connections. I can set it up.
In typical Alien fashion, there is a lot of lying, a lot of betrayal involved. The company still couldn't care less about anything other than more money and getting their grubby hands on the xenomorph itself or anything relating to these life forms. Amanda and Ellen, I would say, are sort of the gray area there. They don't really have a horse in the race. It becomes less about salvaging or finding out what happened to your mother and more about surviving. Almost every human NPC that you make contact with will make that very clear for you from the beginning. Focus on you and survive. While Samuels ended up being a pretty likable character, I thought it was great that many of the droids ultimately turned on the people on these ships, something that we've also seen in the films. The true intent or the actual reason for them existing in some ways in this universe is to be an obstacle. And in Alien Isolation, they're a little more than that.
Good day.
Basically, in a nutshell, don't screw around with the droids in this game, not unless you're Samuels. He can handle himself. It's far from what I enjoyed most about the story, but just having Sigourney Weaver there and being a part of the cast, being involved in this game is huge. And I'm sure it wasn't cheap, not in the slightest with this game's budget. She doesn't have a lot of moments, just a few, but fan service like that and so many other surprises that I won't spoil make Alien Isolation a more than worthy addition to the Alien series. This game is without a doubt one of my favorites of the generation, making my top 5, maybe even making my top 3. If it weren't for stuff like Red Dead Redemption 2, Witcher 3, The Evil Within, and a couple of others, making that decision much harder, much more difficult, it would probably take my number 1 spot because it really means that much to me. If you scare a little or you scare easy and just in general like to be scared, Alien Isolation is the perfect game. Your experience will be even more enhanced if you're a fan of the films. Pay no attention to a lot of the review scores this game received. I'm still not even sure why it sits as low as it does, because it's quite simply one of the most underrated games of all time. Not just this generation, just of all time. I think it's a masterpiece, and the reason I say it's a masterpiece, or I would say, yes, I'm giving it a 10, is I don't really think anyone, or most people, including me, really expected it to be good. It's more than good, it's better than good, and at times, it's better than great. I've heard rumblings that a lot of the people that worked on this game no longer work at Creative Assembly, which is a shame. That's really too bad. Given that, and the fact that it didn't really sell extremely well, a sequel seems highly unlikely in 2020 and beyond. And again, that's a shame because the ending leaves the possibilities wide open. Those at Creative, those at Sega, or someone else listening, make it happen. Many of us would buy it and love it just the same, if not more. Thank you guys for watching my review. I do appreciate it. This is a long time coming. I was going to review Rage 2. That was supposed to be this review. My next review was going to be Rage 2, but that's put on hold for the time being. That game is upsetting me for more than one reason. It's not because I don't think it's fun, because I do, but there's just other issues. So the next game that we're probably going to review or talk about is Resident Evil 2 Remake, which I am currently playing, and we'll get to that. So thanks again. You guys have a good one. Take care. Peace.